Hi everyone, my name is Itay and this is Itay on Software. For those of you who don't know me, I've been a software professional for over 2 decades now. I'm an adjunct professor at Cal State Fulton, teaching computer science, and also mentor people through different organizations like Hire Heroes USA. Today, we'll talk about what I consider to be the biggest career risks that I see people having. But before that, let me start by saying what I don't think is a huge career risk that sometimes people think it is. The first is not choosing the right company, or potentially starting with a company that might not even be in the software space or might not be a brand. That's not a big risk because if you get good experience, you can always change the company later if you're interested. So I don't see that as a big risk. The second thing that people sometimes consider a big risk is not attending a branded school. They might tell me, hey, like I went to that school or the other school, and due to that, my opportunities might be more limited. I don't see that to be true in the tech industry. I mean, I myself have 2 degrees, I have 3 degrees, the last from MIT, but before that, bachelor and master from Israel. People don't usually know those institutes. Perfectly fine. I work with a lot of immigrants. People don't know where the degrees I'm from. And in general, I would say in the tech industry, practical experience usually always outweighs academic pedigree unless you go into like very specific niches. So don't worry about that. The third concern that I sometimes see is, maybe there is no opportunities where I live. There is like this idea that all the opportunities are in Silicon Valley or New York City. And maybe if you live in, let's say, Southern California or Atlanta or Houston or some other place, you might have more limited opportunities. Well, to a degree, maybe, but that's, again, I lived in Southern California for the past multiple years, worked with people here. I don't see that as a huge issue. You can find opportunities everywhere. So yes, it helps potentially to be in Mountain View, but remember, maybe more opportunities, but also more competition. The last thing that I hear is about the immigration and market, right? People might say, hey, I have maybe some issues with my visa, or maybe the market is pretty terrible. Now, I graduated at the financial crisis of 2008. So I can talk from my personal experience. I was able to find a job. It definitely wasn't easy, but it's possible. And once the market recover, you could potentially recover too, maybe upgrade what you're doing. So I think that it's difficulty, but that's not your biggest risk. Definitely not long term. So what's your biggest risk? Your biggest risk is specializing in the wrong field, the wrong role potentially. For example, let's assume that you're a web designer and you're like, I really want to be web designer, UX designer, UI designer. Then you do it and then you realize, you know what, that's not for me. The type of work, maybe I'm not really that good at that. I might want to become a sales engineer, right? So in many cases, a lot of the experience that you have is a wash. It's not very relevant. Maybe you will even remove it at some point from your resume. So this is an area where you took a risk, and if you may be older, it might be harder for you to make that switch, not because you're older, because you have financial commitments, and making a switch might mean that you have to take a more of a junior role at a different role in a different industry, which will pay you less for some time. So. And something that I see, for example, quite common, like I see people who might do, let's say, PhDs even in other fields. So then they realize, oh, you know what, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do academia. So, and then they change maybe to project management for biology or something. So that's also a lot of wash of an experience. And one thing to remember is that I always tell people this: if you are moderately smart, moderately, you don't need to be that smart, and you're willing to work hard to make yourself successful in a role, if you're willing to put like 5 years, 5 years could potentially be maybe two, three different roles, maybe 1, 2, 3 different companies, you can become really, really better and be successful in that role. So if you're willing to put the time, you can be successful. Just make sure that you're putting the time going after something that you actually want to go, because if not, then that's not very helpful. The change between different roles is so tough that sometimes people will even go to school for that. I'm not even talking about certification, which is also a way to change roles, but that's maybe for more for smaller ones. I'm talking about, like, a lot of people, for example, will go to business school, me as well, go to business school to transition from software engineering to product management. Maybe it's not the most effective ways to transition, but it shows you how sometimes difficult it is to change roles. So, how can you de-risk it? Okay, so we talked about the problem, picking maybe the wrong role for you. How can you de-risk it? The first thing is think about your personal compatibility. Think about your personal strength and preference. For example, I talk sometimes with people. I talked recently with somebody who was like a highly social person, and they were like a software engineer, like web, kind of working in isolation. That wasn't really a good match. So, for example, a highly social person might enjoy more and might even contribute more to the company by just being better at that, working maybe with clients, maybe with many different internal stakeholders. So perhaps maybe if it's externally, like partnership or business development or product management would be a better fit. If it's internally, maybe those are things like project, with a project management would have to work with many people, but maybe web designer is not the best fit. Another thing, from a personal compatibility, think about what this role entails and if it's really for you, right? So, a couple of things to consider. For example, um, does the role involve travel? You want to be a consultant, you want to be maybe a solution. If there is a lot of travel, that you need to consider that. Does it involve, from a social perspective, maybe interacting and impressing strangers, maybe more like sales? So take into consideration if that's something that you actually want to do. Does it involve working on the same thing, the same projects for years, or maybe changing projects? If you want to work on the same thing for years, maybe database engineers would be amazing. Again, there is no right or wrong, it's just a matter of personal preference. And if you want to change things, then maybe you want to do more project type work. The second thing to consider is financial. And financial, there is two things. There is the salary and the probability that you're going to get that salary. People sometimes forget the probability. Let's talk about that. So maybe about half the people that I advise don't really have a strong understanding of the pay level in different roles and the chances of getting them, right? So one of the two. First is the levels of pay. You might look at levels.fyi, but that's only for larger companies. For smaller companies, they might pay differently. Another thing is you might not be realistic about your chance of getting into that role. So let me give you an example. Let's talk about product management, an area I know quite well. Product management is very, very competitive to get in. Why? First, there is way less product management roles. Smaller companies often don't have product managements, and bigger companies might be a ratio of 1 to 10, right? So there is just much less roles. The second thing is that there is more people that can apply to be a product manager compared to software engineer. Why? Software engineer requires a certain level of technical skills that a lot of people just don't have. Product management, on the other hand, requires a lower level of technical skills and maybe higher social skills that more people have. So the idea is that there is more people that apply to product management and there is less opportunities. So even though the pay on paper might look similar, your chance of getting it as a software engineer is actually much, much higher. So some roles, again, are just easier to get into. Maybe an example is, let's talk about software engineer versus maybe sales engineer or solution engineer. Let's say sales engineer, right? Let's say you work in sales engineer at maybe a company like Siemens, Samsung, those type of companies, versus maybe a software engineer. Software engineer might require more credentials and more experience. However, organization like maybe sales or solution would be willing to take more of a bet on you. So even though it might look like software engineer might pay better, your chance of getting into the sales and solution might be better. And actually, the variance of pay might be higher, so you might even get paid more there. Remember, the pay level that people are talking about is usually average. Average means more in something like, say, software than something like, I think, like sales. The third thing that you can do to de-risk is just engaging with industry professional. Just listen to them, right? You listen to this video, you can either listen or being proactive about it. This is perhaps the most important advice. Do yourself a favor, and when you're trying to break into a new role, talk with people who are actually doing that. I know a lot of people that plan their entire study and career, and they haven't actually talked with anybody who's doing that role. So I think it's a good idea to de-risk, to talk with somebody to see if that is something you actually want to do. And when you're talking with them, try to assess, am I a fit? Is this position a fit for you? Would you actually like to do that, given what this role is like? Again, don't talk with one person because, maybe their experience would be a bit off. Talk with maybe 3 to 5 people. You will start to see consistent themes. The third question is, how do I get from where I am to where this person is? And what is the likelihood that this will actually happen? Is this a crapshoot, like kind of becoming, like Olympic athlete, which, maybe you do everything right and you don't make it? Or is this something a bit more certain? So also assess the probability of that. How do you find those people? You can find them on LinkedIn. You can listen to their YouTube, maybe ask them questions like here. You can go and sign to some mentorship programs. US veterans, highly recommend Hire Heroes. That's where I'm volunteering. Or just go to industry events. The first thing to de-risk is focus on generic skills, right? So why is there is this risk when changing roles? The risk is because if you know how to do a web design, that does not mean that you know how to work with clients. It's specialized. However, there are many skills that if you have a strategy to put energy in those skills, there are many skills that transfer quite well. I see them when I advise to people that transition between industries. What are some of those skills? For example, customer interaction, the ability to work with customers, that's something that's usually useful. Engineering basic. When I say engineering basic, it's just being kind of aptitude towards technology, the ability to work with technology, leverage technology, not being scared by that. That's something quite useful because if you move to a new field, there is different technology, you can pick it up. The ability to express yourself verbally or written is quite useful. Project management type of skills, to be organized, that's very useful. And those skills are, by the way, very useful, not for the job that you're actually going to get, but actually for the job of getting a job. So that means, remember, finding a job is a job by itself. So all of those generic skills are also useful for that. So I hope that I help you using these tips to de-risk your choice of selecting a role by following them. And I hope that you won't need to pivot, maybe to a different role. However, most people do pivot. So if that happens, it's perfectly fine. Do it early, understand there might be a hit, and just make sure that when you're pivoting, you're going to a role that you won't need to pivot again. And don't worry about what you've done before. You got the skills that you got, the experience that you got, it made you who you are. And from that point, it's going into the new field. If you find this useful, don't forget to subscribe, comment if you have questions, share with your friends, and help to make this content even better. Thank you very much.